Picture a world in ruins, cities crumbled into dust, hope flickering like a dying flame, and humanity clinging to the last shards of survival. In this chaos, amid overgrown streets and rusted wrecks, we find Joel and Ellie, two souls whose bond feels like more than a chance encounter. Their story in The Last of Us, Season 2 tears at your heart, leaves you breathless, and makes you wonder, why does their love hit us so hard? This isn't just a tale of a father and daughter, nor merely a fight to stay alive. It's something ancient, almost mythical, like a legend we knew long before we saw them on screen. But what if their love isn't just their personal drama? What if it's an echo of something vast, something that lives in all of us? Let's pause and think, what makes their connection so special? Why do we, glued to our screens, feel tears welling up when Joel looks at Ellie with that mix of fear and tenderness? Or when Ellie, despite the horrors of her world, searches for meaning, holding tight to Joel? It's not just clever writing or the stellar performances by Pedro Pascal and Bella Ramsey. It's something that strikes a chord deep within us, tapping into stories we carry without even knowing it. Enter Carl Jung, the Swiss thinker who argued our souls are woven from ancient myths, from a collective unconscious brimming with archetypes, timeless images of heroes, families, love, and struggle. Jung believed love isn't just a feeling between two people. It's a myth we live out, a story that ties us to our ancestors, their dreams, and their fears. Joel and Ellie's bond isn't just their own attachment. It's an archetypal saga, a whisper of those tales told around campfires thousands of years ago, a hero shielding his child, a child forging her path. But why does this story grip us, modern viewers living in the year 2025, scrolling through social media feeds and navigating our own dramas? Could it be because we, like Ellie, are searching for meaning in a chaotic world? Or because there's a Joel in each of us, ready to sacrifice everything for those we cherish? Think about how this plays out in real life. In Latin America, where family ties are the bedrock of culture, stories of parents and children become almost sacred. Imagine a grandmother in Mexico City sharing tales with her grandkids about how her father worked 2 jobs to keep the family afloat. That's not just a family anecdote, it's a myth that teaches, inspires, and binds generations. In the same way, Joel and Ellie become a myth for us, whispering, even at the end of the world, love is what makes us human. But how does this myth work? Why does it pull us in so fiercely? And what if it holds not just beauty, but danger? To get it, we need to dive into Jung's ideas. He saw the collective unconscious as an invisible ocean, swirling with images and stories shared by all humanity. Love, to Jung, isn't just an emotion, it's an archetype, a mighty force that shows up in myths, fairy tales, and religions. Joel and Ellie aren't just characters in a show, they're embodiments of these archetypes, the father hero and the child warrior. Their story feels familiar because we've heard it before, in myths of Odysseus, in legends of knights, in the stories of our own families. But what if this mythical love doesn't just inspire us? What if it makes us lose ourselves? Like everything else in The Last of Us has a shadow side. Consider how we live myths in our own lives. Ever noticed how your family clings to a certain story, maybe about someone who overcame hardship for love? Or how, scrolling through social media, you stumble on posts about families sticking together no matter what? These stories shape us, but they can also box us in. In The Last of Us, we see Joel and Ellie living their myth, but it leads them to sacrifices, pain, and moral crossroads. So here's the question, if their love is a myth, where's the line between what uplifts and what destroys? Let's break it down, step by step. We'll start with Jung's collective unconscious to understand why Joel and Ellie's love feels so familiar. Then we'll explore how their story mirrors the archetypes of father and daughter, and how these archetypes play out in the conflicts and chaos of their post-apocalyptic world. We'll peek into the year 2025 to see how myths of love and family shape us today, and even question where Jung might have gone wrong. And in the end, we'll ask ourselves, what does it mean to be part of a myth of love? How do we craft our own legend? But first, let's unravel what the collective unconscious is and why it makes us fall for stories like The Last of Us. So, why does the story of Joel and Ellie feel like something we've known forever, like a tale we've heard before? To figure that out, we need to step into the world of Carl Gustav Jung and his idea of the collective unconscious, a hidden vault where myths, archetypes, and stories bind us all together. Imagine a vast library, not filled with books, but with images and narratives shared by every human, no matter the time or place. This isn't just a poetic notion. Jung believed the collective unconscious shapes our emotions, dreams, and even our capacity to love. But how does this tie into The Last of Us? And why does the love between Joel and Ellie feel bigger than just the story of two people? Jung argued that love isn't just a personal spark, it's an archetypal story etched into our souls. Archetypes are like blueprints we inherit from our ancestors: the hero, the sage, the mother, the child. They show up in myths, fairy tales, dreams, and sometimes in the shows we binge. Think of them as an invisible code steering how we see the world. The love between Joel and Ellie is an archetypal saga of father and daughter, protector and child finding her way. When we watch Joel wrap his arms around Ellie, shielding her from the dangers of their broken world, we're not just watching a series. We're living a myth, one told for thousands of years, from ancient Greek epics to family tales in Latin America. But what makes this myth so powerful? And how does it shape us, the viewers, in the year 2025? Let's reflect. Why is revenge so alluring? When you see Ellie, knife in hand, driven by a thirst for justice, doesn't your pulse quicken? It's not just a plot twist, it's an archetype resonating with something deep inside us. Think about conflicts you've seen online in 2025. Someone posts a fiery rant demanding justice for a wrong, and thousands rally behind them. It's the same myth of vengeance that fuels Ellie. Jung would say the collective unconscious makes us see revenge not just as an act, but as a sacred duty. Yet he also warned, archetypes of vengeance can destroy not only our enemies but ourselves. So, how far will Ellie go chasing this myth? And how far would you go? Now, let's zoom in on the show. In The Last of Us, the collective unconscious isn't just a backdrop, it's a force driving the story. Joel embodies the archetype of the father protector, willing to do anything to keep Ellie safe. Ellie, meanwhile, is the child warrior, searching for her identity in a world falling apart. Their bond feels familiar because it echoes stories we grew up with, families sticking together against all odds. But Jung would ask, what if this myth makes them lose themselves? What if their love, like any archetype, has a shadow side that pushes them toward vengeance, loss, and conflict? Think about a real-world example. In Latin America, family myths are the heartbeat of culture. Picture a young woman in Colombia raising her kids alone, just as her mother and grandmother did. She's living the myth of the strong mother, but it comes at the cost of her own dreams. Similarly, Joel and Ellie live their myth, but it leads to pain and moral dilemmas. Jung would say the collective unconscious gives us strength, but it can also trap us. So, here's the question: how do we find balance? How do we live the myth of love without losing ourselves? To answer that, we need to dive deeper into Joel and Ellie's story. Their bond isn't just love, it's an archetypal saga of father and daughter, reflecting myths that live in all of us. But how does this myth shape their choices? And why does it resonate so powerfully with us, the audience? Let's explore how the archetypes of father and daughter play out in their journey, and what they reveal about our own lives. We'll see Joel become a hero and Ellie a warrior, and how their mythical bond is both their strength and their curse. When we look at Joel and Ellie in The Last of Us, what do we see? Not just two people fighting to survive in a broken world, but something grander, a story that feels timeless, as if carved in stone. It's a saga of a father and daughter, a hero shielding his child, and a child becoming a warrior. Their bond isn't just a plot device, It's an archetypal drama, its roots stretching deep into the myths of the collective unconscious that Carl Gustav Jung described. But why does this story grab us by the heart? How do Joel and Ellie, without realizing it, embody archetypes that shape not only their fate but our own lives? Joel is the father hero, a man who's lost everything yet finds purpose in protecting Ellie. His gaze, heavy with pain and resolve, his willingness to give up all for her, it's an image we know from ancient tales. Think of myths about Zeus guarding his children or knights battling for their kin. Joel isn't just a guy with a gun, he's the archetype of the father, the one who carries the weight of the future. And Ellie? She's the child warrior, a girl growing up in a world that spares no one. Her courage, her search for herself, her fight against chaos. This is the archetype of the child who must become a hero. Together they weave a myth that moves us because it mirrors our own stories of family, love, and sacrifice. But what makes their bond so unique? And how does it shape us, the audience? Think about how often we see this archetype in life. Maybe you know a dad who works endless hours so his kids can go to school? Or a daughter who steps up to care for her family because it's what's needed? These aren't just everyday moments, they're echoes of myths we carry. In Latin America, where family is sacred, such stories become legends. Picture a father in Peru trekking through mountains daily to feed his children. They call him a hero, not because he slays monsters, but because he lives for his family. In the same way, Joel is a hero to Ellie, and Ellie a warrior to Joel. But Jung would caution, archetypes don't just inspire, they can limit. What if Joel, living the myth of the father, stops seeing Ellie as her own person? What if Ellie, embracing the child warrior, forgets who she wants to be? Let's zoom in on their story. In The Last of Us, Season 2, Joel and Ellie face new trials that test their bond. Joel, as the father hero, will do anything to keep Ellie safe, even if it means making morally murky choices. His love isn't just tenderness, it's a heavy duty that sometimes blinds him. Ellie, meanwhile, is growing, no longer just a child but a person seeking her identity. Her struggle isn't only with the outside world but with inner demons, questions of who she is and why she's here. Their mythical bond is their strength, but it also drives them to conflicts, sacrifices, and moments when love feels almost unbearable. So, here's the question: how far can you go for love? And what if the myth that binds them becomes their curse? Recall other stories where this archetype shines. In the movie Logan, we see Wolverine become a father to young Laura, giving his life for her future. It's the same saga as Joel and Ellie's, a myth of a parent and child finding each other in a world gone to ruin. But these stories aren't confined to the screen. Think of your followers sharing their family tales in the comments, parents who fought for their kids, or kids who found the strength to keep going. These are part of the same archetype Jung called out. Yet Jung would ask, what if this myth makes us forget ourselves? What if Joel, in protecting Ellie, loses a piece of his humanity? And what if Ellie, walking her warrior's path, drifts from what makes her her? This myth of father and daughter doesn't just tug at our heartstrings, it makes us question our own roles. Do you ever feel like a hero, needing to save everyone around you? Or a child, searching for your place in a chaotic world? Joel and Ellie show us how archetypes shape our love, but they also remind us, myths can be dangerous if we follow them blindly. And that leads us to the next question: how do these myths play out in conflicts? How does the love of Joel and Ellie, rooted in this archetypal saga, fuel struggles, vengeance, and moral dilemmas? Let's dig into how myths spark conflicts in The Last of Us, and what that reveals about ourselves. In the world of The Last of Us, love and conflict are so tightly woven you can't have one without the other. When we see Ellie gripping her knife, fueled by a hunger for vengeance, or Joel ready to tear the world apart to keep her safe, we get it. Their story isn't just about tenderness, it's about a fight powered by ancient myths. Carl Gustav Jung would say the conflicts tearing their world apart are expressions of archetypes buried in the collective unconscious. But how do myths of love turn into fuel for strife? Why does Ellie, so young and vulnerable, live by a myth of revenge? And what does this say about us, the viewers, watching her journey with bated breath? Jung believed archetypes aren't just bright images of heroes and families. They're also dark forces pushing us toward destruction. Vengeance, to Jung, is one such archetype, an ancient story living in us all. In The Last of Us, Season 2, Ellie becomes its embodiment. Her drive to avenge the losses she's endured isn't just personal pain, it's a saga we recognize from myths of warriors who stopped at nothing for justice. Think of Medea in Greek mythology, who raised everything for retribution, or Norse saga heroes whose lives were chains of blood feuds. Ellie, like them, is swept up in this myth, and her love for Joel only sharpens her resolve. But what if this myth blinds her? What if it makes her lose herself? Let's pause and think, why is revenge so magnetic? When you watch Ellie tracking her enemies, doesn't your heart race? It's not just a plot twist, it's an archetype striking a chord deep inside. Picture the online battles of 2025. Someone posts a scathing call for justice over a slight, and thousands jump in. It's the same myth of vengeance driving Ellie. Jung would say the collective unconscious makes us see revenge as more than an act, it's a sacred calling. But he'd also warn, archetypes of vengeance can shatter not just our foes but ourselves. So, how far will Ellie go chasing this myth? And how far would you? Let's dive into the show. In The Last of Us, conflicts fueled by myths aren't just clashes with enemies, they're inner wars. Ellie, driven by love for Joel and the losses she's faced, becomes a warrior, but her vengeance leaves her exposed. The new character, Abby, adds another layer to this drama. Her own quest for revenge mirrors Ellie's, showing how myths can pit people against each other, even when they're fighting for the same thing. Their conflict isn't just about survival, it's a clash of archetypes, where love and vengeance are two sides of the same coin. Jung would say such conflicts are inevitable because the collective unconscious lives in us all, nudging us toward ancient scripts. But is there a way to break free? Recall a historical example. In the myth of Achilles from the Iliad, his vengeance for his friend Patroclus brings him glory but also dooms him. His story warns that the myth of revenge, like the myth of love, can destroy. In real life, we see this in family feuds. Imagine two brothers in Chile who haven't spoken for years over an old grudge, each convinced they're right. Their fight mirrors Ellie's. Yet, watching Ellie, we wonder, is there another path? Can the love that fuels her vengeance become something else? Forgiveness, reconciliation, a fresh start? Think about your own life. Ever felt that burning urge for revenge? Maybe someone betrayed your trust, and you wanted to hit back? That feeling is universal because it's part of an archetype in the collective unconscious. But The Last of Us shows us revenge isn't the end of the story. Ellie, like us, stands at a crossroads, follow the myth demanding blood or find a new path where love becomes a bridge to healing. Jung would say the choice is ours, but it's not easy. And that leads us to the next question. Why do myths like love and vengeance grow stronger in a world falling apart? How does the post-apocalyptic chaos amplify these archetypes, turning Joel and Ellie's story into a true legend? When the world crumbles and the foundations of life turn to ash, what's left? In The Last of Us, Season 2, we see Joel and Ellie's love shining like a beacon through the overgrown ruins and endless fight for survival. But why does their bond become so powerful, almost legendary, in the chaos of a post-apocalyptic world? Carl Jung would argue that in times of crisis, the myths living in the collective unconscious spring to life with fierce intensity, becoming not just stories but guiding stars. But how does this work? Why do myths of love and family grow stronger when everything else falls apart? And what does this say about us, watching their saga in the year 2025, navigating our own storms? Jung believed chaos awakens archetypes because, in such times, we crave meaning, something eternal to anchor us. In the post-apocalyptic world of The Last of Us, there are no laws, no morality, no tomorrow, only the here and now. In this void, Joel and Ellie's love becomes a myth that gives them purpose. Their bond isn't just affection, it's an archetypal saga of father and daughter, echoing ancient legends of heroes who pressed on despite the end of days. Think of Orpheus descending into the underworld for his beloved or families holding tight during wars and disasters. Joel and Ellie are their reflection, a legend proclaiming, even in chaos, love is what makes us human. But why is this myth so vital? And how does it help us face our own crises? Let's reflect. What happens when your world feels like it's falling apart? Maybe you've lived through moments where everything seemed hopeless, a lost job, a broken relationship, or global turmoil? In those times, we often turn to stories that give us a foothold. In The Last of Us, the post-apocalypse is the perfect stage for myths because it strips away the noise, leaving only the core: love, sacrifice, struggle. Joel, protecting Ellie, becomes the father-hero archetype, while Ellie, carving her path, is the child warrior. Their story resonates because it answers an eternal question: how do you find meaning when nothing seems to matter? But Jung would add, the myths that save us in chaos can also blind us. What if Joel and Ellie's love, their legend, pushes them toward choices that break them? Let's dive into the show. In The Last of Us, the chaos of the post-apocalypse amplifies every facet of their bond. Joel, driven by the father archetype, will sacrifice anything to keep Ellie safe, even if it means crossing moral lines. Ellie lives the warrior myth, but her fight often leads to loss, not just of others, but of herself. New characters like Dina bring a romantic layer, showing that love in chaos can be passionate and hopeful, not just familial. Their stories are myths that help them survive, but they're also traps, locking them into ancient scripts that lead to pain. So, here's the question: how can love be both salvation and a curse? And what are we searching for in these myths as we watch their struggle? Recall history. During wars and crises, myths always burn brighter. Picture families in Latin America during the economic upheavals of the 1980s. Parents told their kids tales of ancestors who endured against all odds. Those legends gave strength, but sometimes they chained people to rigid roles: the father who must fix everything, the child who must obey. Likewise, in The Last of Us, myths give Joel and Ellie purpose but limit their freedom. Jung would say myths shine in chaos because we need them, but he'd warn, blindly following archetypes can pull us from reality. So, what myths do we lean on in our crises? Ever noticed how, in tough times, you fall back on family stories or dreams of heroism? Think of films that capture this. In Mad Max, Fury Road, the world's collapsed, but the characters find meaning in myths of freedom, family, and hope. These stories keep them going, but often at a cost. In real life, we see this in your followers' stories. Someone shares how their family banded together in a crisis, living a myth of unity. Joel and Ellie are their mirror, but their saga reminds us, myths are powerful in chaos, yet they demand care. And that leads us to the next question: how do myths of love and family shape us today, in 2025? How do they mold our values and bonds? And what can we learn from Joel and Ellie to craft our own legends? In the year 2025, as we scroll through social media feeds and catch headlines of change and crisis, what keeps us grounded? Family, love, the stories we tell ourselves and each other. In The Last of Us, Season 2, Joel and Ellie show us how love can become a legend, a myth that helps us stand tall in chaos. But Carl Jung would say these myths aren't just pretty tales. They're archetypes shaping our values, our families, our very lives. How do myths of love influence us today? Why does Joel and Ellie's story feel so close, even if we're far from their post-apocalyptic world? And what can we take from their saga to understand how to build our own stories of love? Jung believed myths aren't relics of the past but living forces molding our present. Love, especially family love, is an archetype that echoes through every generation, every culture. In The Last of Us, Joel and Ellie's bond is an eternal tale of father and daughter, resonating with us because it mirrors our own family values. Today, in 2025, as the world shifts faster than we can keep up, we lean hard into these values. The idea of home, the sense of belonging, the love that weathers any storm. But how do these myths shape us? And why do they matter so much as we try to find our place in the world? Think about your own life. Ever noticed how family stories steer your choices? Maybe tales of how your parents or grandparents pushed through hardships for their kin. In Latin America, such stories are the heartbeat of culture. Picture a mother in Argentina telling her kids each night about her grandfather, who crossed oceans to give his family a better life. That's not just a memory, it's a myth that teaches her children to cherish family, to fight, to love. In the same way, Joel and Ellie live their myth, one that says, family is what makes us stronger. But Jung would ask, do these myths always lift us up? Or do they sometimes tie us to roles that don't fit? Let's look at the show. Joel, as the father archetype, does everything to shield Ellie, even when it leads to moral gray zones. His love is a myth giving him purpose, but it can blind him. Ellie, meanwhile, seeks her identity, but her warrior's path is often shaped by the family values she's absorbed from Joel. New characters like Dina bring romantic love, showing that family myths can be passionate and hopeful, not just parental. Their stories remind us that family values aren't just about the past, they're the future we build. But what if these values grow too heavy? What if the myth that inspires us starts to hold us back? Recall real life. In 2025, many of us feel the weight of family expectations, to be the good kid, the perfect parent, the loyal partner. These roles are part of the myths we inherit. Think of your followers sharing in the comments. One talks about raising kids alone, living the myth of the strong mother. Another shares how they tried to please their parents, even at the cost of their dreams. These stories echo the same archetype driving Joel and Ellie. But Jung would remind us, myths give us strength, but they can trap us if we follow them blindly. So, here's the question, how do we balance family values with our own identity? How do we live the myth of love without losing ourselves? Consider other examples. In the movie Everything Everywhere All at Once, we see a heroine wrestling with family, redefining myths of motherhood and love. Her story shows that family values can bend if we let them evolve. In real life, we see this in people rethinking what family means, couples choosing not to have kids, or friends becoming tighter than blood relatives. Joel and Ellie teach us that family myths aren't set in stone, they're living stories we can rewrite. But to do that, we need to see where these myths might lead us astray. And that brings us to critiquing Jung's ideas. What if the myths shaping our love distort reality? How do we find the line between inspiration and illusion? We've explored how the myths of love, rooted in the collective unconscious, shaped Joel and Ellie's bond, turning their story in The Last of Us Season 2 into a legend that grips us. But what if these myths, so inspiring and grand, have a darker side? Carl Gustav Jung saw archetypes as bridges to eternity, but even he admitted, myths can warp reality, pulling us away from who we are. In a world where Ellie chases a myth of vengeance and Joel clings to the role of father hero, we start to wonder, do myths always guide us true? Or do they sometimes trap us, leading us astray from the truth? And what does this mean for us, watching their saga in 2025, searching for meaning in their tale? Jung believed archetypes are universal patterns that give us purpose, but he also warned, get too lost in a myth, and you risk losing touch with reality. Myths are beautiful, but they simplify the world, casting complex people as heroes, victims, or villains. In The Last of Us, we see Ellie, swept up in the myth of vengeance, losing a piece of her humanity. Her quest for justice, fueled by love for Joel and her losses, makes her a warrior, but it distances her from who she could be. Joel, living the myth of the father who must protect his child at all costs, sometimes overlooks Ellie's own desires. Jung would say myths lend us strength, but they can blind us. So, how does this play out? And how do we balance myth with reality? Think about your own life. Ever followed a family story, being strong, successful, or perfect, and felt it was swallowing you whole? In Latin America, where family myths are sacred, this hits home. Imagine a young man in Brazil dreaming of being an artist, but his family expects him to take over the family business. The myth of the dutiful son gives him purpose, but it robs him of freedom. Likewise, Ellie, chasing her warrior myth, loses sight of a reality where vengeance might not bring peace. So, here's the question: how do you know when a myth is helping you versus holding you back? And what can The Last of Us teach us about this? Let's dive into the show. Ellie, driven by the myth of vengeance, clashes with Abby, whose own story mirrors the same archetype. Their conflict isn't just two people fighting, it's a collision of myths, each seeing herself as the hero and the other as the enemy. Jung would say the collective unconscious locks them into these roles, but reality is messy. Either Ellie nor Abby is simply good or evil. Their stories show myths can distort truth, turning people into symbols. Dina, with her romantic love for Ellie, tries to pull her from this myth, offering a path of forgiveness and hope. But Ellie, like many of us, struggles to let go of the archetype giving her purpose. So, how often do we cling to myths, even when they hurt us? Recall history. In the myth of King Arthur, the Knights of the Round Table lived by ideals of honor, but those same ideals led to betrayal and Camelot's fall. The myth inspired them, but it blinded them to real conflicts. In 2025, we see this in online battles, where people defend their myths of justice, family, or truth. Think of your followers sharing how they tried to live up to family traditions but felt lost. Jung would say finding balance between myth and reality is the key to harmony. But how do we do it? And what can Joel and Ellie show us? Consider other stories. In Parasite, myths of wealth and success pit families against each other, warping their view of one another. It's a reminder that myths can be dangerous if we mistake them for truth. In The Last of Us, Ellie and Joel teach us that love, even mythical love, demands awareness. Jung urged us not just to live archetypes but to question them, so we don't become their prisoners. And that leads us to our final question: what does it mean to be part of a myth of love? How do Joel and Ellie, despite the limits of myths, become our legend? And how can we craft our own stories, inspired by their saga, while staying true to ourselves? We've traveled a long road, unraveling how the love between Joel and Ellie in The Last of Us Season 2 becomes a myth, an echo of archetypes living in the collective unconscious, as Carl Gustav Jung described. Their story isn't just a survival drama, it's a saga that moves us because it's ours. It speaks of love that conquers chaos, of sacrifices we make for those we hold dear, and of the struggle to stay true to ourselves. But what makes their bond a true legend? Why do we, watching in 2025, see Joel and Ellie not just as characters, but as reflections of our own stories? And most importantly, how can we craft our own legends of love, inspired by their example? Jung taught that love is a myth we live, an archetype tying us to eternity. Joel and Ellie aren't just a father and daughter, they're embodiments of this myth, a hero protecting his child, a warrior finding her path. Their love is a legend because it speaks to what stirs us all: family, meaning, wrestling with our inner selves. Yet their story also shows myths aren't fixed. Ellie, torn by vengeance, and Joel, blinded by duty, learn to rewrite their roles, balancing archetypes with reality. That's their greatest lesson: love becomes a legend when we don't just follow a myth but reshape it, staying true to who we are. But how do we do this? And what can we take from their saga to fuel our own lives? Think about your own story. Ever had a moment when love, for family, a friend, a partner, made you feel part of something bigger? In Latin America, where family myths are sacred, these moments become legends. picture a sister in Mexico caring for her younger brother, putting her own plans on hold. Her story is a myth of love that inspires others. Likewise, Joel and Ellie craft a legend that says, love isn't just sacrifice, it's choosing to be human, even when the world falls apart. But Jung would remind us, to make this legend ours, we must be its authors. What if we stopped just following family tales and started writing our own? Let's revisit the show. In The Last of Us, Joel and Ellie's love endures trials, losses, conflicts, moral dilemmas. New characters like Dina add hope, showing love can be a light guiding forward, not just a battle. Their saga isn't a perfect tale, it's raw, full of mistakes and discoveries. Jung would say that's what makes it a legend. Myths come alive when we live them consciously, embracing their light and shadow. So, here's the question: how do you live your legend of love? What stories do you tell yourself about family, loved ones, or yourself? And how do they shape your path? Recall other examples. In Coco, we see a hero rethinking family myths, finding balance between tradition and his dreams. It's a story of love becoming a legend when we make it our own. In real life, we see this in your followers' tales. Someone shares how they reconciled with their parents, rewriting a story of hurt. Another talks of finding family and friends, crafting a new myth. Joel and Ellie are our mirror, showing love is both a gift and a task. In 2025, with the world swirling with change, that task is more vital than ever. Jung taught that myths aren't rigid rules, they're invitations to create. Joel and Ellie, through pain and chaos, build their legend by choosing love again and again. Their story doesn't just inspire us to admire, it calls us to act, to rethink our roles, find meaning in our bonds, write our own sagas. So here's your call: craft your story of love. Maybe it's about forgiving someone close, or finding the strength to be yourself despite expectations. Every such story is a myth, linking you to Joel, Ellie, and everyone who's ever loved. So grab a pen, open your heart, and start writing. Your legend is waiting.